Hello everyone, this is Gene Quinn. I want to take a moment to encourage you to mark your calendars for March 22, 23, and 24 for next year. That's when we'll host IPWatchdog Live 2026 at the Renaissance Capitol View Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. We already have more than 65 confirmed speakers, and I anticipate we'll have a bigger, broader program than ever before, with as many as 120 or more speakers, with half being senior in-house attorneys. If you're interested in speaking, sponsoring, or being an exhibitor, don't delay. I'm already working to finalize the agenda, which will be posted shortly after the new year. So get in touch with us today if you'd like to be a part of IPWatchdog Live 2026. For more information, visit IPWatchdog.com and click on Live in the nav bar. I hope to see you there.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to IPWatchdog Unleashed, where each week we journey into the world of intellectual property to discuss the laws, news, policy, and politics of innovation, technology, and creativity. With analysis and commentary from industry thought leaders and newsmakers from around the world, IPWatchdog Unleashed is hosted by world-renowned patent attorney and the founder of IPWatchdog.com, Gene Quinn, who has twice been named one of the most influential people in the intellectual property community and recognized numerous times as one of the top IP strategists in the world. Take it away, Gene.
Thanks, Renee, and welcome everybody to this week's edition of IPWatchdog Unleashed. As we prepare to close out the year and flip our calendars to 2026, I thought it would be interesting to take a look back on some of the conversations we had with guests during 2025. While this is not intended to be a quote-unquote best of 2025, not surprisingly, there were moments from several of my conversations this year that really stood out for one reason or another, and not always because they dealt with hard-hitting IP issues. Take, for example, my conversation with Judge John Holcomb, who is a federal district court judge for the Central District of California. Judge Holcomb was one of our keynote speakers at IPWatchdog Live 2025, where he and I had a fireside chat-style conversation, which was our podcast episode for March 10, 2025. In the piece of the conversation that follows, I asked him about how he became a judge, and specifically how he got onto the radar of those advising the president who to nominate. How did you go from being, just one of us in the room, a litigator, a prominent litigator, to getting on somebody's radar screen, to being nominated, and then being confirmed? Walk through the various stages of this process.
Well, it almost didn't happen many times. It's a real roller coaster process to be confirmed as an Article III judge. I was, for me, I've always wanted to be a judge from the time I decided to go to law school when I was in the Navy. I always knew that I wanted to be on the bench. And I tried a few times along the way over the course of my almost 3-decade career as a lawyer, and nothing quite worked out. So it was April of 2017. President Trump had just been elected. I'm a Republican, but not in ideological, never written or said anything that was particularly political. My writings have been, how do you select an expert witness in a patent case, that sort of thing. And I was thinking, what am I going to do in the last third of my career? And it occurred to me, President Trump has just been elected. He's a Republican. I'm a Republican. This might be my chance to try to get on the district court, which I hadn't tried before. And it is difficult to get traction if you don't know people. I just started writing letters to the White House. I tried to find out who was in charge of judicial appointments for California, and never really got much traction until serendipity. I met a fellow alum who was on the ABA committee that vets judges, and she introduced me to some people at the administration who were involved in appointing judges, and then that's how I got noticed. Now, to be a district judge, you obviously have to get a presidential nomination, but also you have to get the approval of your 2 home state senators. So in my case, at that point it was 2019. It was then the late Senator Dianne Feinstein and then Senator Kamala Harris. So as you can imagine, it's not real easy to get an upcheck from those 2 senators and the Trump administration. At the time, there were 8 vacancies in the Central District of California. because nothing had really happened during the Trump administration in terms of California. I think largely for the reason that they just weren't on the same page. So I applied to each senator and to the White House, and finally got interviews with both senators' committees. And I had an interview at the White House in March of 2019. I thought it went okay. And then 2 weeks later, I got a call saying, yeah, thanks for coming in, but we're going to head in a different direction. So that was a bad day. And then in August, I got a phone call from the same phone number, the 202 number. I was at the gym working out, and I recognized the number, so I hopped off the elliptical, and it was the same guy saying, yeah, this is going to seem like it comes out of the blue, but are you still interested? Well, I think what had happened, I don't know for sure, is, you see, you got to be on the bottom of everybody's list. If you're at the top of the Trump list, you're not going to get the approval of those two Democratic senators, and vice versa. So I think they'd gone through everybody who was at the top of the list, and it was the bottom of the barrel people that were left. And I'm happy to say that I was right there. I was in the barrel. So that was August. And then, vetting process, FBI investigation, and the nomination was White House announced it in September of 2019. Nomination actually came through in November. Judiciary Committee hearing in June of 2020. In the height of COVID, it was the first Judiciary Committee hearing that was done remotely. I was kind of looking forward to, being in the Judiciary Committee room with my family behind me and sitting at the dais, but not to be. It was on Zoom. So that was June, and then the vote was in September. September 18th was the final confirmation vote, and fortunately it was confirmed, 83-12. And then a few days later, Justice Ginsburg died, and everything shut down in terms of judicial nominations and confirmations. So very, very fortunate in this roller coaster process to make it through.
Then later on in my conversation with Judge Holcomb, the idea of judicial philosophy came up. I shared my frustrations with judging in that it often seems to me that judges on various levels will decide what it is that they want the outcome to be and then reason backwards in order to justify what they've already decided should be the outcome. This led Judge Holcomb to tell the story of three umpires.
So there's a story about the three baseball umpires, and they're sitting around after a game talking about the art of calling balls and strikes. And the first umpire says, I calls them as I sees them. And the second umpire says, oh, no, I calls them as they are. And the third umpire says, nah, they ain't nothing until I calls them. I love that story because it's three views of reality. I calls them as I sees them. That pitch comes in, there's an objective truth. That pitch is objectively a ball or a strike, and it's the umpire's obligation to make that judgment call. And this umpire is saying, I calls them as I sees them. I do the very best that I can to determine there is an objective truth, and I do my best to perceive it. The second umpire, I calls them as they are. There's an objective truth. He denies that he has any perception error. The third umpire is cynical view. They ain't nothing till I calls them. And he's kind of right, because if that pitch comes in and it's way outside the strike zone, but he calls it a strike, it's going down in the scorebook as a strike. So applying that to law, I like the first umpire. I calls them as I sees them. I believe there's an objective truth. I believe under the law as it's given to us in statutes from the Supreme Court, from the Federal Circuit, in my circumstance from the Ninth Circuit, I believe that there's an objectively correct answer on the motion, and I'm doing my very best to get it right.
The next piece I'd like to share with you is taken from our podcast that published on September 15th, 2025. It is a conversation with Darren Tang, who's Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization. Our conversation spanned many topics, including the future of IP, how IP has been a force for helping humanity, WIPO's strategic initiatives, and the burgeoning impact of artificial intelligence. A central theme of the conversation was Director Tang's fervent advocacy for intellectual property as a catalyst for global innovation and the betterment of the human condition. That really comes through quite clearly in this next segment.
IP is so important, right, for community, because when you give these entrepreneurs, right, a chance to succeed with their new idea, you give them a chance to create jobs for other people. You give them a chance to solve challenges that are community-based or even sometimes global problems that need to be addressed. And in now the work that we do, we find now that we piloted this new way of providing support, looking at IP. And by the way, this mentoring programs that we do, it's 6 to 12 months. So it's not flying in somewhere, doing a 2-day seminar or 3-day workshop and flying out and then you're on your own. But we accompany these people on their journey, right, for 6 to 12 months. So it's a really intense way of working with them.
And that's so critically important. I mean, that's one of the things I've tried to do at IP Watchdog, because before we started doing our own live programs and stuff, the thing that frustrated me, you go to an event, you have great conversations. Everybody identifies problems and concerns and has great ideas, and we need to do this and advocate for this. And, you know, a lot of these events, you get people who fundamentally disagree with each other. But you have good conversations over food and drink and panel discussions and everything. And everybody gets so energized. And then you go home.
Happens,
And it doesn't. So one of the things I've always really tried to do is continue the conversation. You know, and not have it stop.
You know, Gene, the thing is this: one of the things that we try and do at WIPO, and I think that sets us apart from some of the other agencies, international agencies, right, is that after the talking, right, there must be action. So in a lot of the things that we do, right, we just don't want to be a glorified talk shop. And that's one of the problems, right, with UN agencies. People see UN agencies having endless negotiations, discussions, papers that are put out, right, and they don't see the impact on them in their lives. And so it's natural that some people begin to wonder, right, so what do they really do? You know, apart from being a place where diplomats come and have, you know, a nice place to talk and in a nice city like Geneva, right, what impact is there on the ground? See, so there's a lot of the things that I've tried to bring to WIPO, and probably this comes a bit from my Singapore background as well. We know we are quite obsessive compulsive about getting things done.
Practical
is to get things done, you see. So after these conversations, after these nice discussions, there's momentum, there's a lot of, you know, energy around, then we want to lock that down, right, into getting things done, see. So you know, for example, the 600,000 people that we have trained in the last 5 years, we've set up 1,800 technology innovation support centers in 80 countries. These will become tech transfer offices in time to come, so that research that's happening in different parts of the world can have a pathway to commercialization. And it's not easy to build these pathways, but they deserve that. Things like CLIP, which is a very interesting project we did with some of the most experienced musicians in the world, including Bjorn from ABBA, where we created a free online platform to allow musicians to know about copyright and IP and the music industry, right, so that they can earn a decent living as musicians, you know, and many other things, you know, that we're doing in order to really bring IP to the grassroots. And I think this, again, is important because you're right, that's not just giving back the community, but if you're going to raise IP standards in other countries that don't see the value of IP, right, it starts with showing them the value of IP, right, at their local level. And so these women entrepreneurs in these countries, or youth entrepreneurs, or business owners that we support, they then become the ambassadors for IP, right, for us, for all of us, right, you know, in their own country. They are the ones that tell their leaders, right, or their business associations or their political leadership, right, take IP seriously because it's helping me, and we need to have IP help not just me, but many others in our country as well. So we're trying to shift the logic of IP, right, and the logic that IP standards need to be raised away from a traditional conversation where it's from the outside. You know, traditionally when you talk about raising IP standards, right, it's been part of trade negotiations or part of some grand package where in return for market access, right, country A reluctantly increases its IP, it lifts out its IP standards. We want that to shift. We want that to be something that country A is doing because they feel that's part of their journey as well. And so they look at South Korea, for example, that's done so well in the last 30, 40 years, right? You know, especially with creative economy, with K-pop. And they want that to be part of their journey. So WIPO's job is to give them that, you know, and to give them the programs and help them draft the laws and put in place the right policies and strategies, right, so that IP becomes part of their journey as well. And I have to say this, I'm seeing a shift in the world on this. You know, I'm seeing a real shift, and that part is super exciting.
The next conversation I'd like to share with you was without a doubt the most emotional conversation we had during 2025. It unfolded around one of the more pressing issues facing life sciences today, the journey of life-saving drugs from laboratory to patient. We discussed the pivotal role a strong patent system plays in this important journey with our guest, Sherry Knowles. Many of you know Sherry. She is the founder of Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies and former chief patent counsel for GlaxoSmithKline. What many of you may not know about Sherry is that she's a breast cancer survivor, and she shared her story with us.
So I'm a breast cancer survivor. So, and I went through, I can tell you a little bit about my story because that tells you how important drugs are. That's a personal story. We all have personal stories. I hope that you don't have one exactly like mine, but you may have one that's a family member. You may have one that's, a relative or something. And so, thank goodness this was about 20 years ago. So I'm way past it now. I'm over it. I'm recovered and it's gone. But going through that was transformational, because, I actually just looked in the mirror one day and I saw this piece of skin that was like pulled up like a divot. It was kind of pulled up. I actually saw my cancer in the mirror. Okay, that's how I found it. So it was a divot that was kind of pulled up right at the cleavage point here. And I thought, that's weird. I'd never seen that before. And so I kind of, closed my eyes, felt around a little bit. There was a lump there. So I thought, and it was the size of like a small marble or something, right about here. And so I thought, I haven't seen that before. But, women get fibroids. That's not really uncommon. So I thought, well, I'll give it a week or two to go away. We'll see what happens. So I was feeling it every day to see, but it just sat there. So I knew what the rules are. The rules are if you have a lump, you have to go get it checked. So I just saw, I called up and I went to the local hospital, got a mammogram, and I was actually making a joke about it because mammograms are not fun. They like squeeze you to pieces. They are not fun. Okay, and I was making a joke and saying, don't squeeze those cells. They're going to go popping all over, because I didn't think it was anything. And so after that, they came in the waiting room. They said, well, anytime you have a lump, then you have to get an ultrasound. Of course, they have this thing that they say for each one. Then you have to get an ultrasound. So I was laying on the table, get the ultrasound. I'm literally looking at my watch because I know I have a call coming up. I was with King and Spalding at the time, and so I'm looking at my watch thinking, I got to get back to work. I've got a call coming up. Kind of, can you really hurry up and get this thing done? And I just said, oh well, it's it's water filled, right? This is a fibroid. And then she said, no, this isn't a fibroid. This is solid. So then I go, okay, that wasn't good. Then and I said, they said this one is going to have to be biopsied. So that was scary. But then their next line that they always tell you is, but 80% of these are not cancerous, They always have their line to make you feel better till you get to the next place. So my next line was, 80% of these are fine, so don't worry about it. And I said, can I get my biopsy today? And they said, no, I think this was on a Monday. They said, no, you can do it on a Wednesday. So I came back on Wednesday. And so when I got in, that's when you get the radiologist, because they're going to come in and do the actual biopsy and get a sample. So then there's a big monitor there that the radiologist is looking at. And when they got it, the radiologist got an amazing picture of it on the screen. And that was one of the craziest moments of my life, because I came face to face with my own cancer. I saw it on the screen. And, I'm in science. I've represented pharmaceutical companies for ages. A fibroid is round. This thing looked like a cross between an amoeba and an octopus. So it was thick in the middle, and it had hands coming out. And you got a picture clear as day on the screen of that with all the fingers coming out. And I said to the radiologist, can you tell what that is? I want to say, because I can, that's cancer. And she said, well, I don't like those edges, but you never know. That's the next line. You never know till you get the biopsy, so just go ahead and get the biopsy in 2 days later. So then they call back within 24 hours. You also know something's wrong when you get a call from the hospital. Any call from the hospital within 24 hours, okay, then you're on their list, right? So I got the next call back, and they said, we didn't get the results that we thought we were going to get. I already actually knew I had it because I saw it on the screen. So I don't think they were telling me news at that point. And I actually felt bad for the woman who had to call and tell me that, to be honest with you, because I already knew what it was, and she was scared to tell me. And so she said, you have what looks to be high-grade infiltrating ductile carcinoma, and you need to get to an oncologist immediately. So I said, okay, wow. And then the next time you know that you're in trouble is when the hospital on its own calls you the next day and said, did you call a doctor yet? You don't get a follow-up call very usually. So I got the follow-up call. Anyway, I did my own research. I found a doctor to go to. And that started on a saga because I didn't have baby cancer. I had real cancer that I had to go through, and I ended up with 29 doses of chemotherapy, 40 radiation treatments, and 3 surgeries to get rid of this. But here I am 20 years later.
That was a great story that helps remind us why it is that we do what we do and why it matters. Thankfully, Sherry and so many like her are still with us today because of the hard work of innovators. But now we're going to pivot, and we're going to pivot to something fun. You never really know what it is that you're going to find out about somebody when you just sit down and you have an unscripted conversation with them. And that's what happened when we talked with Henry Haddad. Henry is Deputy General Counsel for Bristol Myers Squibb, and he sat down with us during our Life Sciences program this fall to have a conversation with us about intellectual property. We published the entire conversation on November 3rd, 2025. It was a great conversation. I've known Henry for years, so I think we had a very good rapport with one another. But there was something I didn't really know about Henry, and that's how did he get into the IP area? So I asked him a question about that, and then what proceeded to come out was a really wonderful conversation about music, creativity, and innovation. And that's what follows next.
I came from a family in the entertainment field. My father was a songwriter in the 50s and 60s. For you guys who like the oldies, VACITION, anyone? People from Europe, a one-way ticket to the blues. That was my dad. And then my mom's younger brother grew up in the 60s, was part of the hippie generation, was in hair, and then wrote his own musical and his own music, and had several hit songs later during the disco era, like Last Dance and It's Raining Men. So I grew up with them around me, and I think it sort of imbued me with an appreciation of creativity. Mm-hmm. I mean, they loved what they did. They loved what they created. And I saw how much it meant to them. And I think part of why I'm so passionate about what I do now, granted on the science side, is because I saw what it meant to them.
Yeah, creativity is interesting because right brain, left brain, but it is all creative.
Right.
And it does take a different mind to create. And you're in the law school, you're moving into this direction. You've got where was your first job?
So I got a summer associate gig at the firm of Morgan and Finnegan. Anyone remember Morgan and Finnegan? Yeah, we got a few. IP boutique firm in New York City. That was summer associate of 1990. And I was very excited because I always wanted to get myself a guitar. So I went and bought a really cheap guitar with my first paycheck at Manny's Music. And I still have it. It's a terrible guitar. The strings are this far off the frets, but yeah. I still have it.
So do you still play?
Yes, not very well, but I do.
Yeah. What's your favorite genre?
Just old classic rock stuff. Yeah.
So, and I know this is not IP related. Well, maybe it is to some extent. Who do you think is the greatest guitarist of all time?
Oh man.
So, and I think there's a right answer, and there's acceptable alternatives, but there's a right answer here. No pressure.
I mean, I think by consensus, Jimi Hendrix.
Okay, I would accept that answer, but I don't think the right answer.
Okay, who do you think?
I think it's Eddie Van Halen.
Okay, well, he was part of our, the generation I grew up in. He was terrific.
Yeah, he was, and then all of a sudden he kind of went more pop with
the keyboard thing.
The keyboard
that
thing was
no
just. And he just popped into my head as you were talking about this because I was just listening to Eruption the other day, and now there was this woman was playing Eruption on a violin.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh my God, that's just like a different level of.
Welcome, folks, to the Van Halen podcast today.
Yeah, this is the Van. No, but we all had our start somewhere in IP, and IP touches so much of our lives, whether it's the movies we watch or the TV shows that we watch, or the sports, which is protected because of the streaming now, or its distribution over the air, or it's music, or it's what's more near and dear to our heart day to day is the invention in a whole bunch of different areas. What is the coolest, to the extent that you can pick just one, or maybe there's a couple, what do you think is the coolest invention that you've had the privilege to be involved with? And I say it that way because I know you're at a point where you're doing a lot for the company and you're not maybe doing the frontline day-to-day stuff. So what's the coolest thing that you've seen?
So many great things, right? So many things which have changed so many lives. I've had the privilege of being the Chief IP Counsel at Bristol Myers Squibb. Next year will be my 15th year. I had about 10 years at Shearing Plough before it was acquired by Merck. I saw a lot of great innovations that have made a big difference in patients' lives. Probably the one that I have the most affection for, and frankly is incredibly impressive, was the being there at the front line of immuno-oncology. And knowing that Bristol Myers Squibb did the first deal with ultimately a Nobel Prize winner, Jim Allison from MD Anderson, around an antibody to the CTLA-4 receptor, which is now a product Yervoy, which was the first IO drug for treating melanoma. And then doing a deal ultimately with Dr. Hanjo from Kyoto University, who I got to know quite well, who also won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. And he was the one who discovered, he was actually looking for receptors in the immune space. How do you modulate immune response for autoimmune disease? And he found this receptor, which was called PD-1. And he posited that if you block it, potentially you can modulate the immune system. But ultimately, it came very clear that this was a way to treat cancer too, because cancer tricks the immune system into thinking it's normal. And by masking that receptor, you instead get a response to treating cancer. And not only was that approved for melanoma, but for non-small cell lung cancer, renal cell cancer. I mean, the list goes on, probably about a dozen different indications, because it applies across different indications because of the fact that it activates your immune system. It's not specific to a cancer. So that was incredibly cool to work on that, for now about 12 years.
The next conversation I want to share with you is one I had with Patrick Kilbride, which we published on August 25th as a part of this podcast. Patrick is known to many throughout the industry for serving as Senior Executive Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center for almost 15 years. After leaving the Chamber, Patrick formed Kilbride Public Affairs, where he provides public policy advice and advocacy relating to trade and intellectual property policy. During our conversation, he recounted his transformative journey from skepticism about intellectual property, which he often regarded as a hindrance in trade agreements during his time at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office during George W. Bush's administration, to becoming a staunch advocate for IP. In the segment you will hear from that conversation next, we discuss what it really means to be innovative.
The last time I was here with Eugene, we talked a little bit about innovation, and you threw me a total softball. You said, "What is innovation?" And I whiffed it, and I'll tell you why. I remember the thought pattern running through my head. I was like, I'm going to disappoint Gene because he's not going to like this answer. And I hold you in such high regard that really just kind of paralyzed me. But here's the thing. I think innovation is just another type of economic activity. It's just doing something new, right? So what is it that makes it special? It's just that it's hard. And it's time intensive, it's labor intensive, it's resource intensive, and it's not guaranteed to work. When you're doing something inherently new, you don't know what's going to come out of it. And so in order to make those types of investments, we have to have an environment that supports them. And in so many parts of the world, that environment is just simply not present, right? So one thing I always used to say at the Chamber, speaking to international audiences, is innovation happens everywhere. It's it's a shared part of our common humanity. We all have this instinct to be creative, to be innovative, to do something new, to solve problems. It really is what makes us human, and it happens everywhere. People do innovate, they do create. You see it all the time. The problem is in most places it's neither sustainable nor transformative, because that requires the investments on a scale to really do something different. And that's when you have to have those economic conditions, those environmental conditions, those labor and legal conditions that allow you, as you said, to own what you do and invest in it.
Yeah. I don't think that's a bad answer. And but I remember bringing it up. I don't remember you whiffing on anything ever in any conversation. The thing that irritates me, and I know why I brought it up, because we've had this conversation many times. What irritates me is that we don't have a standard definition of innovation, which then allows the implementers to say, no, what the inventor did is not innovation. We're the ones that come with the value. Now, I understand that they have great value. I mean, Google, Apple, Samsung, all these companies, inventors can't do stuff on their own. Without those companies, these things wouldn't go anywhere. What I just like to see is that everybody realizes this is a big pie. Everybody can have a piece, and we shouldn't discount anybody's contribution. And I fundamentally think that one of the big problems is when the implementers talk about innovation, in order to discount what the inventors have done, is to say that, well, what we're doing is innovation because we've never done this before. And in my mind, the fact that you have never done this before does not make it innovative. It makes it new to you. And what I just heard when you were talking about innovation, I don't think we disagree, because I think innovation it's hard. It hasn't been done before. Somebody is doing it for the first time. And if you're just copying somebody else, then you're a copycat. You're an also-ran. You're a Me Tooer. I don't think that's innovative.
So, and I'll try to be provocative, see if you disagree with this. I don't care if something's innovative or not. I only care if it's novel, and not novel to you, but novel to the world. And if, you come to court and you can stipulate, all parties can stipulate that, okay, this is novel. It hasn't been done before. I don't care if you call it innovative or not. You did the work to get to something new. I think our law ought to protect that work. And it goes back to, I think, what the American founders intended in the Constitution, although they kind of whiffed it a little bit in terms of the wording, if you ask me. But if you read the Federalist Papers, what James Madison had to say, it becomes clear that they believed that property rights tied back to labor. If you did the work, you own the output. Mm-hmm. And, I think when you take that mindset, it's like, okay, somebody did something verifiably new. We've looked at all the prior art. We don't see any, indication this has been done before. They should own that work. Now, if somebody else can get to the same outcome through a different path, the workaround, right? Perfectly legit. That's their work. Mm-hmm. But if I rely on your work, then that's your ownership.
No summary of what happened during 2025 would be complete without at least some discussion of what went on at the Patent Office this year. It was a monumental year, mostly with respect to what happened at the PTAB. With a real change in leadership and a real change in philosophy, the PTAB today is not what it was at the beginning of 2025 by a long shot. And while I agree with what's going on at the Patent Office myself, you've probably heard me and read my thoughts a great deal on the PTAB, which I have not been a fan of since the very beginning of the AIA. But what I have for you next is two pieces from two different conversations I had with Scott McCown, a partner with Wolf Greenfield and author of patentspostgrant.com. Scott has a reputation as one of America's top practitioners at the PTAB, And while he does represent patent owners, about 2/3 of his workload deals with representing petitioners. So Scott has always been willing to come to our events and to share his thoughts, whether it be in our webinars or on this podcast, to give us an idea about what petitioners are really thinking. The first piece you will hear comes from our conversation, which we published on September 8th.
I mean, it's a political upheaval, in a nutshell. Some of that was expected, right? We expected that when got Trump 2.0 that they would go back to the definitive policies of Trump 1.0, at least, right? At a minimum, the former policies under Director Vidal we expected some rollback there. But I think we've gotten to the point in U.S. government where, not to get too political, but every time you have a change from Democrat or Republican, it becomes, well, let's not only roll everything back, but let's go even further, right? So when the next administration comes in, they're going to have to work that much harder to get back to where we could live with it. And so we're seeing things that we've never seen before, changes every week, theories and policies. I've called them the Chewbacca defenses in the past. They just don't make any sense, right? It's just settled expectations. From a policy perspective, you can look at that and say, well, maybe that's the way the system should work, like trademarks, right? Incontestability and things like that. But if you go into a district court and you say, well, I've had this patent for 8 years, you should throw out the entire invalidity case. That's not going to happen. So very unusual, very policy-driven concepts and notions that, frankly, you would expect to see come from the legislature and not the executive branch. And so everyone's sort of struggling with that. There's been multiple lawsuits. There's probably going to be a lot more. There are rule packages, presumably, that are coming to codify all this and commit it to regulation. There'll be lawsuits there. There'll be controversy there.
So that conversation obviously happened before the USPTO came out with its latest proposed rule package relating to the PTAB. So we had Scott back for a conversation that we published on December 8th. In this conversation, Scott unpacks the USPTO's controversial proposal, or at least controversial from the petitioner's perspective, the so-called one-and-done PTAB rule package. Scott drills down on what petitioners believe Director John Squires is actually trying to accomplish.
I think the Patent Office would say, well, we call this the one-and-done rule package because we think, as a matter of fairness, that if you have a patent, it's granted, it's in litigation, it's upheld in litigation, or it's upheld in a patent re-examination, that should be it. You shouldn't be able to then, you being the next defendant or whomever, be able to come back to the Patent Office after either the Patent Office has made a determination or a court and challenge the patent again. That, in a nutshell, is what they're trying to accomplish with the rules, and there's various mechanisms proposed as to how they would get to that.
Later in our conversation, Scott then tells us what he believes is the USPTO's narrative about why it is that they're trying to do that.
I mean, the narrative that comes from the Patent Office and those that support the rule is always very general. Well, it's unfair to have multiple challenges, and that sort of resonates with most people. Yeah, second bite at the apple doesn't make sense. But what's happening in practice is you have entities that are in the litigation business. That is their business. In some cases, they're funded entities, and they're suing multiple people around the country, if not around the world, at different times. So if they're suing Apple in 2018 and Apple challenges it, and then they sue Microsoft in 2021 and Microsoft challenges the same patent, they're arguing, well, that's unfair. Which in litigation, that's how it works. Everybody gets their own defense. You can present prior art that's different from what Apple did if you're Microsoft years later. The one and done is a little bit misleading. It's really about one litigation, right, and done. And now forever, this patent is gold plated. And if you look back at why we have the AIA in the first place, it's an alternative to litigation. It's not an alternative to the first litigation. And so that's where I think, it's a significant overreach for the agency to propose this rule, which I think is pure legislation, to say, no, we think this is the way that the system should work, which in essence is what they're doing.
Next up is a conversation we published on July 28th. It was about one of the hottest topics, not just in the intellectual property world, but one of the topics that everyone, both inside and outside government, was discussing and still is discussing today: the cost of prescription pharmaceuticals and why it is higher in the United States than anywhere else in the world. So we set the record straight in our conversation, explaining what is really causing Americans to pay higher drug prices. To accomplish this, we brought in Corey Salzberg, who is Vice President and Global Head of IP Affairs for Novartis, which is one of the leading and most innovative biopharmaceutical companies in the world. We discussed the issues that matter for the pharmaceutical industry, including what and who is really responsible for higher drug prices in America.
But on the medicine side, Gene, I know you know this figure, but just to remind the audience, I mean, the average drug, despite the narratives that we hear all the time, gets about 13 years before it faces generic competition, which is not very long. We have other drugs, some of our biggest selling drugs, at Novartis, for example, Entresto, our drug that is likely to come off patent sometime this year or soon, that's going to end up getting something like 10 years, right? So 13 is the average. And there's a ton of investment that goes into these drugs. The average cost, across the board in our industry is about $2.6 billion and up. I think that's an old figure now. It's risen since then, like the cost of everything else. Yep. As you said before, it takes 10 to 15 years, 88% failure rate along the way. So, you're relying on these few successful drugs to fuel the rest. So built into that, though, is the expectation that eventually these drugs, and it's not even eventually, right, 13 years on average, is when those drugs go generic. They become a lot cheaper at that point because generic companies, by design, don't actually invest in the R&D. They just copy, the successful products later on. And that actually opens it up at cheaper prices for more people to be able to access it at cost savings. And that's part of the system, too. And that's what people forget, I think, on this narrative about not appreciating IP. Every single drug in existence today, 90% of which are generic in the United States, started their lives as patented innovative drugs that began with a patent system. So it's all part of the same life cycle, part of the different sides of the business. And without that system, you'd have none of it. Right in line with that point is the savings to the healthcare system that medicines provide, in addition to to just the medicines making you feel better, all of that. The alternative for a lot of these diseases that the new medicines are treating would be to go to the hospital. Right. And I think there's calculations, we've talked about this before, and maybe we'll talk about it later. In the context of IRA, with how many fewer drugs we're going to have over the next decade because of the the price controls that are put in place under the IRA drug price negotiation program. And by some of the estimates, the healthcare system is actually going to lose about $51 billion in value or in lost savings over the next 10 years as a result of the losses of those drugs, because instead of treating those diseases with cost-effective drugs that eventually will be even more cost-effective as they go generic, you're not going to have those drugs. So those are diseases where people are going to have to continue to go to the hospital. The hepatitis C drugs are always a great example of that, right? I mean, people had some sticker shock, I think, to the prices of those drugs when they were released, 10 years ago or whatever it was now. But what they failed to consider or appreciate was that prior to this, these were one-time cures, basically, for these drugs. And prior to that, people were going to the hospital to be treated on a regular basis, at the cost of, I think, millions of dollars it was per patient over time. So when you think about the price of a drug, it's not just the price of the R&D that went into it, the risk, the failure rates, and the necessity of enabling innovators to be able to recoup investment on the few successes to offset and pay for the entire R&D system. It's also the overall value that these drugs are creating, not just for the individual patient, but for the healthcare system, that ought to be considered when we think about whether a price is fair or not. Problem with the MFN kind of approach is that, again, it's not looking at the causes of if we're paying more than other countries, which is true actually for a lot of drugs. We do pay more in the United States or spend more on a particular drug than we do elsewhere. there's two sides to that. One is, are we paying more than we should in the United States? And the answer, I think, is yes, and I'll explain why in a minute. The other side to that is, are other countries who are benefiting from these same innovations, because all pharmaceutical companies these days either are or strive to be global in terms of patient reach, are they paying enough overseas? And the answer to that is no, they're not. And there's a variety of reasons for that. So we can unpack those two things. The first, are we overpaying in the U.S.? I think that the American drug system is paying too much, but it's not because we're rewarding innovation too much. It's because of the system that unfortunately has evolved over the years of middlemen in our healthcare system. That's the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, the insurers, and other people in the middleman chain in the drug supply distribution chain, who are taking 50 cents on every dollar that is spent in this country goes into the pockets of these middlemen instead of to the innovators who are actually delivering the drug and inventing and developing and delivering and manufacturing the drug. 50 cents on the dollar, if you think about how amazing that is.
So half goes not to the person who created it and not to the person who's selling it to you.
Yep.
It goes to somebody in between those two entities.
Yep.
Now, so lucrative is that? Obviously, it was 50%. I mean, you do the math. Everybody can do the math.
Yep.
So lucrative is that you've started seeing pharmacies like CVS get into that middleman.
But vertical integration.
Right. The middleman needs to go away. Because as I understand, we're the only country that has a middleman like that, right?
Yes. I mean, there are rebates in other countries, and I should say, I mean, I'm not an expert on all the pricing, but I, at a high level, I can talk about how the system works. But yes, I mean, there are rebates and things like that in other countries in other ways, but to my knowledge, we're the only country in the world that has this system of middlemen. I mean, historically, just to understand it, my understanding is this started in the 1960s when prescription drug benefits became part of the healthcare system. And I think, employers and insurers looked for a way to turn to these entities that started to be created to handle the negotiation and the provision of the prescriptions. That all makes sense. I think there's no problem with that aspect of it. The problem is that the pricing models over time have evolved such that these PBMs and all these other middle players rely on rebates from the drug manufacturer in order to make a living, and those rebate levels have grown and grown and grown over time. The other thing that, as I understand it, is the way they profit is from the spread pricing, where they are charging the insurer or the employer that they work for one amount, but then giving the pharmacy that actually dispenses the drug less. So they're kind of there's cuts all along the way in the spread there as well. So that is, I think, part of the system that is generating additional costs. Again, 50 cents on the dollar when you add it all up on drugs, which our industry believes ought to be a target for lowering drug prices in America, which would go a long way towards, I think, bringing down the versus the list price, the actual amount that people pay. The other aspect of this, I should say really quick. The other problem with it is that when patients pay their copay or their coinsurance, they are being, in many cases, charged a % of the list price of the drug, not the actual price that is ultimately being paid at the end of the day when you take out the rebates and all of this. So the out-of-pocket costs of Americans is inflated because of that formula as well.
And last but not least, we have a conversation where I sat down with Gina Johnson, the Chief Legal Officer of Ridge Wallet, LLC, to dive into Ridge Wallet's approach to intellectual property and how the company relies on design patents, utility patents, trademarks, and more to protect against fakes, dupes, counterfeits, and knockoffs. This conversation was recorded in front of a live studio audience as a part of our Women's IP Forum in September and was published to the podcast on October 20.
Oh, we've done it all. I would say you really have to think about what your goal is. And for Ridge, our goal is to just get rid of this mass confusion about what is a Ridge wallet and what isn't. A Ridge wallet is a wallet sold by the Ridge Wallet LLC. It is not anything else other than that, okay? And yet, I think I said this in the panel earlier, people now refer to anything that has the same silhouette as our product as a Ridge wallet. You can go on Reddit, you can go on X, TikTok, everywhere people are saying, I got my Ridge wallet. And I just want to shake them and say, Does it have the Ridge logo on it? Right. If not, it's not a Ridge wallet.
Well, that's
right?
your trampoline, kerosene, elevator moment, right? I mean, you know, all those things used to be trademarked.
Right.
So how do you functionally in 2025 fight Ridge from becoming generic? Which I don't think it has.
Right.
But it's got to be something you think about.
Yes, definitely. I think that's in part how I got my job here, which we can talk about as you noted. But really, we wanted to go big at first. So back when I was at K&L Gates, we proposed to Ridge, let's just go to the ITC. Let's try to cut this off at the source, right? And see if we can do that, and then use that general exclusion order to our advantage. And that's what we did. I came in-house in the middle of our ITC case, finished the ITC case as the chief legal officer of Ridge, got the GEO, and we use that on most marketplaces. Amazon's great once you have an order. Alibaba is pretty good with the order. The problem is a general exclusion order only excludes products that are imported into the United States. And oftentimes, some marketplaces will say, well, this product is being sold on Alibaba. You need to buy the products that you have proof of importation. Short of that, we can't use this GEO. And it's like, come on, guys. Like, I'm in the U.S. This is being advertised and marketed and offered for sale to me in the U.S. I cannot practically order every single infringer off of Alibaba or AliExpress. Ridge will go broke if that's the case. Not really, but I mean, it's just such a waste of our resources. Right. We shouldn't have to do that. And most of these, you have to order like minimum quantities of like 50 or 100. I'm not doing that. I'm not waiting for them to come to the U.S. That's not, that can't be how we take these things down. So the GEO is limited in how effective it is on online marketplaces. So then what do? This is where just building a robust patent portfolio, IP portfolio, is so important. So I talked a bit about our foundational patent, the 808 patent, which was the utility patent. That's the patent we took to the International Trade Commission. From there, Ben Weed came in-house. He had a background in patent prosecution, became a patent litigator, but was able to do all of the patent prosecution for us in-house. And we just got creative with our patent prosecution strategy. If you look at the wallet, we got the silhouette of the wallet in a design patent. So that's great because that can pretty much eliminate all of the just knockoffs who keep the shape but aren't necessarily counterfeiters or using our trademarks, right? They just have the silhouette. They want to induce that confusion. They're now infringing that design patent because it is for the silhouette of the product. But then you have people who are getting a little bit funnier with it all, who are eliminating the money clip because in that design patent I'm talking about, the money clip is required. So now they just take photos of their product without the money clip on it, and they say the money clip can be sold separately, optionally, or they'll take out on Alibaba, they'll take out the finger notch, the thumb notch that we discussed, and they'll show a little carving of like what they could do to the product if you want that thumb notch. So then you have to get even more creative. And we looked at and filed for patents that show the end view of the wallet. And if you look at that, there's certain ways that the money clip engages from a design perspective. There has to be two holes on either side of that money clip for the money clip to go inside. So we claimed literally just those two holes from the end view. So we've gotten so creative with the design patent portfolio. We use those things. So that's kind of the design patent utility patent side. In addition, we did file for a 3D trademark, which covers the beveled edge of the wallet because we noticed that there were some marketing pieces from other brands that would intentionally say, ours is just as good as a Ridge wallet because Ridge uses beveled edges, now we do too. And it's like, okay, you're purposely trying to induce consumers to believing this is just as good as Ridge, it has the same shape, and now it has the beveled edge. Well, guess what? We have trademark coverage over that now as well. So that's been great. But what do you do if the marketplaces still aren't accepting some of these things? And inevitably that will happen because they don't want to be the arbiters of infringement, validity, those types of things. What do? You bring them an order. I talked about the ITC order. but we also live in the Northern District of Illinois. I'm in Chicago. What other types of orders can you bring to Amazon so that you don't have to make them do this gigantic job of trying to figure out whether there's infringement? We file Schedule A cases, or we'll file against a foreign defendant that's unlikely to show up, get a default judgment, and take that piece of paper to Amazon. So it has been a journey, Gene, and we've gone through just about everything you can do. And if you ask me, are they still getting away with this? Yeah, they still are. And I am constantly trying to figure out new ways to combat this.
And that brings us to the end of our walk down memory lane. Thanks for joining us for this episode and a look back at 2025. We're excited to move forward into 2026, and we hope you'll be a part of that journey along with us. And as always, if you have any thoughts about what it is you'd like to hear us cover here on the podcast or on IPWatchdog.com, reach out and let us know. But that's all we have for today. Bye for now, everybody.
Thank you for listening to IP Watchdog Unleashed. We will be back next week, and we hope you will join us again. In the meantime, please be sure to visit IPWatchdog.com to read all the latest news and information about what is happening in the intellectual property world. And also be sure to subscribe to our free daily email newsletter.